Today, we are talking about some truly sci fi technology that scientists have been trying to figure out for nearly 200 years, and now it's here. I'm talking about hyperlogistics, which, thanks to Elon Musk, many people know as the Hyperloop, or this underground system for transporting people and goods. For almost 2 centuries, we thought that the key to this high speed underground transport system was pneumatics or pressurized air, but we are now seeing much more success with robotics, especially for shorter distances. And today we are joined by CEO and co-founder of Tubular Network, Ben James. At Tubular Network, they engineered autonomous robots that carry and deliver payloads using a network of tubes, hence the name. So we're talking robots and tubes, making deliveries. It's very sci-fi looking and a key component to this hyperlogistics infrastructure that we are seeing start to grow. Prior to founding Tubular Network, Ben worked at Magic Leap as a senior product manager for their spatial visualization strategy, which is how we cross paths. My name's Laura Elliott, and I'm also joined today by Sophia Lazaro, who is the Dauntless co-founder and chief product officer. Sophia, Ben, welcome to the Dauntless podcast.
Thanks. So happy to be here with y'all.
Yeah.
Excited to have you. This is going to be a fun conversation. You have a unique combination of experience with both technologies, so it'll be interesting to get all your takes.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Tubular Network and how you personally have used XR and maybe your XR experience to get to where you are today?
Yes. So I am the co-founder and CEO of Tubular Network. I am an engineer by background. I study electrical and computer engineering at Georgia Tech, which we've got one other yellow jacket on here. And let's see, I've used XR in a number of places for Tubular Network. So I've used it in figuring out where the infrastructure, like we have these robots and tubes, but we've got to place the tubes somewhere. Can the tubes fit? Can a prototype or a demonstration fit in a given space? I've used my iPhone to scan a whole room, or in some cases, a whole hangar, and then figure out how big the demo would be in there. In fact, there was a demonstration space here in Austin that they said we couldn't have because our demo wouldn't fit. And we measured it and we said, yes, it will. And they said no. And then we used VR and a digital twin of both the room and the demo to prove that it would. And then we got that space. So it's helped in unexpected ways. We've used it for design. The biggest design breakthrough of the company happened in mixed reality. It was during COVID, and we had somebody about 2 miles away, my co-founder Dylan, he was in VR. Somebody else who was checking out the company to see if he wanted to join, Alfonso, was down in Bastrop, and we were all in this virtual warehouse taking 3D models of the tube and then trying to draw different ways of transitioning between tracks. And we couldn't crack it. And then when they shifted something, I saw something and I drew it in. And that became a core design feature of our whole system, which enabled it to have no moving parts anywhere in the tracks, the intersections, the vertical tracks, the stations, and all the moving parts are in the shuttles, which makes it far more reliable and higher throughput, more resilient as well. So biggest design breakthrough happened only in virtual reality, in mixed reality. And that's because sometimes for solving spatial problems, you need spatial experiences. And then the way that we've used mixed reality the most is in selling the idea. So sometimes it's to customers, sometimes it's to partners, sometimes it's to people in the ecosystem of robotics. But when you say we use robots to send goods in tubes and you can send them between warehouses or at the city scale, people's brains interpret that in wildly different ways, I found. And they have lots of questions. And I often find myself battling their misconceptions more than them asking questions about how this could be utilized. And so what we did was created a mixed reality experience, and you can just pop on a virtual headset, and in about 5 seconds, they understand everything they need to about what it looks like and how it's used. In this one, industrial context. It has helped in a number of ways. For one, mixed reality and virtual headsets are still such a wow factor. Many people haven't tried them. They think it's for video games or something. And when you show them a real robotics use case in a warehouse, like industrial use case, they get pretty excited and they feel like they've been there. And then when they take it off, they remember it for months. I've had people follow up 6 months after I showed them that demo I forgot we even interacted. And they'll be like, I remember that demo. And by the way, I'm going to connect you to somebody that I came across that could use you or your technology. And so it's really helped live rent free in a lot of people's brains because it's such an immersive, compelling experience to just go see it in 3D. It's very useful for when it's a large thing that you're trying to tell a story about, or it doesn't exist yet, or it's like a very noisy environment. Like for instance, in manufacturing warehouses, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of visual noise. And if in kind of a mixed reality experience, you can tone all those down, gray them out, or make them not so detailed so that the eyes focus on the thing that you're trying to build that narrative around. And so it's probably a long-winded answer, but mixed reality has really helped Tubular Network in a lot of ways. In fact, last story, our first flagship deployment that we won over because of a 3D rendering of what it would look like. So this is right before we got it into VR that we could show folks. But this 3D rendering, it looked like Nintendo 64 graphics. I've actually shared it with you if you want to show it. It was not great. It's kind of brutal in how limited it was, but it showed the concept. And in the first 7 minutes of that call with this customer, which is a big aerospace company, they said, we know where we want to put the tube. How soon can you build it? And so it really shows the power of mixed reality and selling robotics, that people can see it and intuit how it works and how it might integrate into their system or operations and get somebody over the line.
It incited the Cookie Monster effect. When we were pitching, that was one of the things that all of our mentors said you want to try to inspire is the Cookie Monster effect. Just give me this now. Like the take my money Futurama meme. That's what you want. And it's great that XR was able to deliver that. I'm thinking now, like kind of that checklist you went through of these are the things that XR as a marketing and sales tool is useful for. Like I know a lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, you can use it to like place a couch in your living room and see how it looks." And that's not really what we're talking about. It's instances where it's something that doesn't exist yet. It might be a little abstract in people's minds, and being able to give it that concrete effect. Like I was just thinking for the wind turbine technology company, that would be a great instance to use this as a really practical tool, because when you say towerless wind turbines, people understand what you're saying, but it's very hard to picture in your head. And if you could drop someone into an experience and be like, oh, this is what that would look like installed in our town or in this region, you don't have to do as much work. But that's often not how a lot of people use XR, especially in a sales and marketing context. I don't know how many times I've seen XR activations where it's like, scan this QR code and this cute thing will pop up. There's so much more to it than that.
Yeah. And the thing about XR is that there was this hype cycle that happened, and a lot of people came away with the conclusion that XR is dead. But that's not what's happened. Mixed reality is being used in a number of industries, and the people who are talking about it are not always the people who are deriving a ton of business value out of it. So the people who are leveraging it correctly to derive a lot of business value are keeping it to themselves. So working at Magic Leap and working with a ton of tech founders and entrepreneurs, I've come across a lot of uses of mixed reality that are really compelling and drive a lot of business value, but it's not so public yet.
It's also not like a single use. There's not like one use case that has just captured the zeitgeist and has this really clear, like, oh yes, everyone should be using XR for, right? Because even for training, not all training should be done in XR. Certain types of training where the situation is difficult to emulate or the physical environment that you would be operating in is difficult to emulate, then the ROI is there. But I think that's one of the other things that works against XR is that it doesn't have one of those, oh, this is the single use case where it always makes sense to use XR. It is a medium, and depending on how that medium is deployed, it can have great impact in some industries and other use cases. But I mean, you hit on a ton of use cases in that, right? So using it as a sales tool, seeing is believing, right? So rather than having a 15-minute conversation, you could show them in 5 minutes what it could actually look like if they were to use it. Another one that you talked about is designing, right? Which is, it's very difficult for most people to think in 3D for extended periods of time, particularly on a very nuanced problem. So it is easier to look at something that is supposed to be 3D in 3D, but building prototypes can be expensive. So it can be more efficient to look at the 3D model in 3D rather than looking at a 2D screen. I do think you are probably because of your background at Magic Leap, in a minority of founders in hard tech or in robotics that are so quick to turn to XR as a medium. And I'm curious, I'm sure in both of those use cases and maybe in others, you faced hurdles at trying to bring XR into the equation or bring it into your process. What hurdles or challenges did you face and how did you overcome them?
First, let me comment on another use case that you brought up that I can't believe I didn't think of, which is training and repairs. Robotics are complex systems, and if you have to train a technician and then send them to a location, it can be quite expensive, especially at scale. Whereas if you can take somebody who's got some technical aptitude or technician aptitude, pop on a headset, and that headset assists them with a live manual as they're doing things. If they run into any issues, it's like call an expert and they see what you see and they can comment on it or point to things in your line of sight or in your vision. It is an incredibly efficient way and like a new capability that's really interesting. And then another area it's used in robotics and other industries is just in visualizing complex data. So robotics create a ton of data. Like a single humanoid robot can generate terabyte of data a day if it's being tested and operated, which is just an obscene amount of data. And how do you take the relevant data and then show it in a way that's meaningful so that you can make better decisions or understand it better? If it's a spatial operation, first of all, any data that's spatial in nature might deeply benefit from being visualized and understood spatially. Secondly, complex data might benefit from being visualized spatially. On a screen, we're only working with 2 dimensions, maybe 3 if you add time. With mixed reality and the way that you navigate that data, there's a number of interfaces you can use, but the best one is just moving your head to see the data from different angles, different vantage points. It can be incredibly powerful for like if you've got multivariable data or spatial data, complex data, flight paths of planes, the common areas of use within a landscape for robotics, wearing points on robots. All of that can be more intuitively understood through mixed reality. And now I will need you to repeat your question because my brain went off a different direction.
No, those were good use cases and good call outs. What I was curious about is you've been so quick to pull XR into your processes as a robotics entrepreneur. And I think it's because you know how to do it, having worked at Magic Leap. And I'm curious, did you face any challenges or hurdles when you were trying to bring XR into the process? Either other people's opinions about the medium, maybe technical problems about bringing it in, and if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I've definitely run into issues bringing XR into robotics. For one, I think the holdup for a lot of mixed reality is the hardware. So the headsets that we have are either very expensive or limited in what they can do. And as the hardware evolves and it's not going fast enough, hello, everybody in the mixed reality headset world, please go faster and do greater things. This is your time. But if the headsets get more capable and at a better cost point, it's going to unleash a lot of possibilities in where mixed reality can be used. So that's always been one. It's like, how do you afford these $3,000 headsets as a startup? It's been challenging. The second one is there's a perception both internally and externally, like internal to the team or Tubular Network when I'm working with folks, as well as externally customers or investors or partners, is that virtual reality, which is primarily what we've used at Tubular Network, virtual reality is like a shiny, sparkly thing. It's not a real enterprise or industrial tool. It's not a commercial tool. It's, what word am I using? Trying to find here. Like,
it's like window dressing. It's the cherry, not the sundae. Yeah.
It's a marketing shtick. It's not a real tool. And so when I bring up, let's do that in VR, there's a lot of, is that because it's the best tool or is that because you like VR? And it's a good question to ask with any application of it that you have. But often I find myself, even if it is the better tool, just battling this misconception that virtual reality is a marketing shtick. It's a shiny thing that doesn't actually do things better than other tools available. That's one hindrance. And then from a technical perspective, I've worked a lot in mixed reality, but I am by no means an expert. I have not yet made a VR app myself. Unity, Unreal, whatever, like I haven't authored one. I'm sure I could learn how to, just haven't taken the time. But I'm not to that level of sophistication where I can just go build whatever's in my brain. So I'm reliant on other tools and integrations. That would probably be the biggest one. Other than that, I'm very crafty at figuring out how to get things into mixed reality and how to leverage what I can or scope things down to just get, I don't know, 80% of the value with 20% of the work and see how that goes. I'm not a perfectionist when it comes to getting things into the VR, or more broadly, not a perfectionist in general. So if I've got an idea to get something in VR, I will do a very ugly version of it to just get it in there and see if it's got any value, and then learn from that and iterate as to what needs to happen in mixed reality for it to be useful.
When you were talking about that first use case of mixed reality where you're like, hey, let's pull these people into a session and brainstorm how we're going to figure out this track problem. I see this at least once a week. Someone on LinkedIn will post a video being like, here's this fantastic use case for XR or for VR where you can do engineering model reviews in VR, like in a VR space. And I came from engineering, and for whatever reason, people just don't want to do that. They don't want to review engineered models. Like, model review is a standard part of the process, right? Like when you're designing something, you'll get everyone together in a room and you'll look at what you have so far and try to iterate on it. And the bigger the thing you're engineering, the longer the model review takes. And you'd think that it would be this really appealing use case, right? That you want to get in there and collaboratively do this 3D review. And people just don't. That use case is not picked up. And every time I see it circulating around, I'm like, this is a cool idea, but it's not going anywhere. So why are we still talking about it? But what you were talking about was a little bit different. It was like ideating and problem solving in this spatial medium. And I was just wondering why you think the model review concept hasn't taken off, and what's different between that and what you did find success with in this almost like sandbox environment.
Yep, I'm going to have to look up what that sandbox environment was and tell you guys so you can link it out, because it was a pretty cool experience and the founders were awesome. So on the 3D review, I don't think it's currently the killer use case of mixed reality as it relates to engineering. Some of that is related to people's comfort with mixed reality headsets. Like, inevitably, somebody in the group isn't somebody who's a tech nerd who's thrown on mixed reality to play games before or something. So they're a little hesitant. The headsets, again, sometimes cause nausea. So people have tried it in the past and don't want to do it now, even if the headsets have gotten better than that. The headsets need to get better than that. But a lot of it actually comes down to where that CAD data comes from and the ecosystem. So these CAD providers create wonderful 3D models and then lock that data on their platform as much as they can, because if they just made it easy to export everything that was compatible and people could keep building on it or looking at it on this or that platform, it would reduce the value of their platform for doing those things. And so they're in a bit of a walled garden and simultaneously have not sufficiently invested to make awesome immersive experiences, or at least affordable immersive experiences. And so for those reasons, I think adoption of that use case has slowed down. While I was at Magic Leap, people were doing this all the time. And it was awesome to live in this world where somebody would have an idea, everyone would toss on their headsets. You'd set up a social meeting to say, all these headsets are in the same virtual space as well as real space. And then someone would just drop in a 3D model and we'd all start looking at it. It would be in the same physical space for all of us as we walked around it, and we could each draw, and it was just like so rad. I think the use case has a future. There's some things holding it back. As far as using mixed reality for ideation, Cavernous, CAVRNUS, I believe, is the sandbox environment, and it has so many capabilities in it that I think it has a hard time selling the one thing it's good at because it's good at many. Cavernous is where we had that kind of ideation experience, and we did this dozens of times, maybe hundreds, but probably dozens, in terms of we've got this idea, how do we integrate this? What should this feature look like? And what's great about ideating in 3D spaces, especially if you've got good tools to act on those, is that sometimes inspiration or that spark, that idea, can only come while you're immersed in the space, that 3D object or that design, and talking about it, and the ability to make that change is fast and easy. You know, if somebody's like, oh, we should do this, and then somebody has to go off for a day or two to do CAD and then fabricate it and then bring it to life. As humans often will just overlook that unless it's really called out as something that needs to happen. But if it's as easy as clicking a few things and pointing and bending things, ideas happen a lot faster in that case. And if it's a 3D object, a design that is going to go in the real world, it's hard to capture that on a 2D screen or a whiteboard. And so very similar to how if you're trying to brainstorm an idea, it's hard to do that over like a virtual meeting. It's a little bit better if you're in the same room and you've got a whiteboard. It's really good if you're in the same room and have that object in front of you and you can point and do things. And I would say it's even better in mixed reality when you can do all that and change it and you don't have to be in the same physical space to pull it off. So I think ideation is an amazing use of mixed reality. It's often industry specific as to the tools and workflows that are needed to be effective at it. It's hard to find one tool that does well in a lot of industries, but that's one that I've utilized and leveraged quite a bit.
So a connection my brain is drawing between all these use cases that you've talked about and all the ways that you've used XR has to do with the ROI. And I'm curious your response to my take on this, but it seems that the strongest ROI is time, right? You're using things like it's faster to think about it in 3D space, or it's faster to get a partner or an investor to a yes to understanding what this looks like if they can see it or be immersed in it rather than hear about it on a pitch deck. It's a lot about speed. And as a product person to another product person, I think you'll appreciate this. That can be one of the most difficult ROIs to quantify and to put into monetary value. And it makes me wonder, to our earlier point, to what are all the barriers to XR being used more broadly in robotics and other industries, is if it comes down to that, which is that its main ROI is time, but you need the right platform, the right team, the right headset to gain that time. And time is one of the hardest things to quantify and then assign a monetary value to.
It's hard to point to one thing and say, this is the big impact it has. The one mixed reality use case that's closer or easier, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to do is in training. If you can take a bunch of people being trained the traditional way and then put them through mixed reality and they all get the same results at the end and you measure time, you can get pretty close to this, reduces training by 40% or saves 6 hours or whatever. But it's just hard to look at one quantifiable metric and say, this is what it does. It's kind of like saying, I don't know, how has mobile devices helped us do our work better? And it's just like, well, dozens or hundreds of ways in many different metrics. I think that it might be better to, instead of selling on a single metric and a percentage of savings, focus on what's possible now that wasn't possible previously. Ideas that happen and iterate through in mixed reality at a rapid speed that just wouldn't happen in any other context is what I think of. It's a kind of leap in capability that mixed reality can do in certain areas of business that I think is the real value, and how we tell that narrative as an industry will greatly guide how fast it comes to market. But one hot take that I want to share and get y'all's perspective on, is there a future in which mixed reality doesn't exist? The hype cycle happened and it dies out and it's just not as useful as people think. I should share my hot take. My hot take is it's inevitable. And the reason I say that is, for one, I've kind of lived in the future of what a fully mixed reality looks like, and augmented reality and virtual, and the ability to switch between them is really fun. But I just know what's possible in terms of how you work and live in a world like that. And then secondly, I can look at historical references and lessons and see that sometimes all the right ingredients, except one, are there way earlier and it fails. And then later, when that ingredient comes into play, it works. And it is actually, while I was working at Magic Leap, I was on a flight somewhere and I saw this documentary called General Magic. And I thought, did they make a documentary about this startup already? Like, that's really weird to do. And I start playing it and it is very evident that this is from the 80s right off the bat. And I'm like, what is this? Because even the tagline sounded similar, like the description of the movie on that tiny little screen on the airplane. And turns out There was a group of innovators that had built, I think it was the Mac back in
Hmm.
the late 80s or early 90s. I forget exactly what decade. And they said, we figured out the next computing platform is going to be this computer in your pocket. And we figured out it's going to have a big touch screen and speakers, and it'll be connected to mobile carriers. And you're going to be able to do things like send messages to people that you know. You can look up maps. They effectively solved or figured out apps as well, and they raised a ton of money. Like I want to say AT&T gave them something like $500 million of investment, which back then was obscenely like a ton of money.
It's a lot.
Yeah, but AT&T was betting that they were going to create all these devices that would use more
Mhm.
AT&T. So like, yeah, it makes sense. Very similarly, AT&T invested a lot in Magic Leap. So the parallels of this were crazy. And this was even the team, some of the best product and engineers from Apple who later made the iPhone. So like same company DNA even. However, what they didn't do, they made a great product. It worked as they expected it to. The problem is market education. And secondly, they didn't really solve meaningfully any of the problems of their day. They made this platform that can solve things if people adopt it, and things evolve, software evolves, businesses evolve to get there. So they kind of made the platform of the future and said, if we build it, they will come. But they didn't meaningfully solve any real problems at that moment. And so adoption didn't happen and it died. Years later, smartphones happened with like eerily similar recipe of product.
Mhm.
And you sprinkle in a little bit of Steve Jobs, the app ecosystem, the developer ecosystem, all of these businesses relying on this platform to make them successful. Adoption skyrockets, maybe because of his incredible presentation skills, maybe a number of things that we don't know. But mobile phones are the force they are today, in part because like that recipe was figured out in the late 80s and it just didn't
That's
work
so
out the first time.
interesting. And now, thinking about, what you said about they didn't solve a problem of their day, now I'm making the connection of, well, maybe the first iPhone was so successful because BlackBerry had already convinced everyone that answering email on the go was valuable. Because that's how
Mm,
they needed to be able to answer email when they weren't at their computer. Right?
yeah.
Not that they needed to be called all the time, slightly less urgent, but that they needed to be able to answer email when they weren't in their office. And that's what I remember everyone using Blackberries for, was like sending emails. So I
So it was
wonder
like
if
that killer
maybe
use
that's
case that
why.
could have existed in the late 80s,
Yeah.
but didn't really come to scale until the mid aughts.
It took a
Apple just
habit everyone already
leveraged
had.
that.
I have a really difficult time envisioning a world where virtual reality doesn't continue to persist, because simulators have been around for a long time and there are many careers in which simulators are imperative to a safe training protocol. So virtual reality for sure has a niche, and I think that niche still has more opportunity to grow. Mixed reality, particularly with the rise of AI, I have a really difficult time envisioning a world where it does not become a part of our reality,
Yeah.
because AI is only useful when it has context. And one way to provide context is to sit in front of the chatbot and type all of the things and do your
Yeah.
brain dump. A faster way to provide context rather than typing out every ingredient in my fridge would be to put on a pair of glasses and open my fridge to say, hey AI, what can I make for dinner with what is in my fridge right now? I think the intrinsic desire in our society for convenience and speed will continue to keep mixed reality as a viable technology, as part of the ecosystem. One of the theses that was hot during the hype cycle, which I'm sure you remember, which was that XR was the next mobile phone. I don't know if I'm fully on board with that. That may be because I am a millennial who, like, I will not buy a plane ticket on my phone. Like, that is a big screen task. I have to go to my computer to do that.
Yeah.
And I know, but maybe that's a generational thing. So perhaps like my children, who maybe the percent of time that they will execute things on a mobile device versus a desktop device, or a laptop device, will be so skewed the other direction that it will be easier to make that leap. But I have a hard time seeing it fully take the place of a mobile phone. I see it fitting into the ecosystem of devices that we use, that are used for specific use cases. I don't think I can disagree with your take. It's very difficult for me to walk back the conditions that would make mixed reality cease to continue to develop in the way that it is.
When you said that, when you're like, can you imagine a future world without mixed reality? My initial thought was no, Zuckerberg wants to make the Meta Ray-Bans have a screen in them. And if he can have us in his apps more than what we already are, he's going to figure it out. They will figure out how to make it a utility that we use all the time because they want us in their applications all the time. They want that data, they want that screen time. And like Sophia said, I think AI is definitely an enabling technology, where that goes both ways. Spatial computing is a great way to inform the AI of all the things without having to tell it or type it. These corporations are going to figure it out because that's a great source of revenue and data for them.
Yeah. I mean, I truly do believe it could be like the next big computing platform and personal platform. I do see a world in which mixed reality glasses, by and large, take over a lot of the functionality of smartphones, but it's going to be a long and slow ride down for mobile phones just because they're entrenched in so many ways that we live and work. And so, like, we would have to figure out how to not need a mobile phone for all of those, and that could work not only work on the smart glasses or mixed reality headsets, but that's better and more reliable, just better in most ways that count than on the mobile phone. And with so many of our apps and services and workflows and lifestyles entrenched in the mobile phone world, it's going to take a long time. This isn't the first time that we've had something so prevalent have a superior technology come out. And how did that transition play out? You think of like everyone got around on horses and carriages, and they said, oh, what do you want? People say a faster horse. Somebody comes out with a car, nobody asked for that. It took a while for cars to get adopted at scale, for the infrastructure to get built out, for all the services and workflows and use cases to all work its way into our everyday lives. And even today, horses are still here. There's a lot of great uses for horses still around, and there's a huge market ecosystem. They're not the dominant player that they once were, but there's still a big world for horses in many ways. And so I think it'll work out similarly.
I think in my head, I get hung up sometimes on specific things that I know I use my phone for. I'm like, oh, that would just so translate so strangely to glasses. So like I think of texting, right? And I'm like, that would be, I don't want to speak aloud. My glasses, what I'm going to put in my text. And I'm like, well, I think of some of the kind of social factors. But then I also think about even only 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think I'd ever seen anyone in public on a FaceTime call. And now I see it all the time, or a video WhatsApp call. I see people on like constantly where I can hear both sides of the conversation and I can see them. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess I'm getting the tea on the catch up that you two are having.
What's their reaction after you said that? Kind of looking at their screen, like, oh, I shouldn't look at that.
Right. And so maybe some of it is I'm underestimating how quickly also our social behavior will adapt to the platform as well.
Yeah. And it'll take time, but it will happen in mass. You think about our parents, right? Boomer generation plus or minus one. And when smartphones came out, what was the unilateral answer from all of them in terms of adopting smartphones? Not a chance. I've got my super reliable Nokia, or I've got my BlackBerry. I don't even text that often. What do I need a smartphone for? And now look at them. They're on social media more than we are. They're on their phone all the time. You're sitting there in a family environment and they're all the ones glued on your phone. And you're like, you've got to be kidding me. But, it will happen. And in a great degree, it'll take longer than you think.
I have that flashbulb memory of the first time I saw someone doing voice to text in public. Like they were not having a FaceTime call or anything. They were just using voice to text. And it was in a locker room at a 24-hour fitness. And she was just sitting there like saying a pretty private conversation. And I'm like, I don't know that you should be saying, like, I know she was doing it for ease of use, so she didn't have to type it out, but I'm like, people can hear you. And it was stuff that I wouldn't say, but that has very quickly changed. That was like maybe 5 years ago. And now I hear all kinds of conversations in the locker room of 24-hour fitness. I had 2 more questions that I was hoping to get to. One of them was if someone has, heard this conversation and is like, I want to use XR either to help with like hard tech marketing and sales, or I want to use XR to help in my engineering process somehow. How would you say they get started, and what questions should they ask if they have to go out and, like pick a XR supplier or a headset or anything like that? And then my other question was, we talked a little bit about the killer app for XR, and if you had any inklings about what the killer app or killer feature might be.
Yeah, and yeah, these are the killer app. And what I'd recommend people do are, one is the first step of the killer app. So they're related. I think sales in robotics is absolutely the killer app of XR, because when you're using a new technology and justifying it, the closer it is to generating revenue in terms of the business, the better it is to easily justify that, improving that, scaling that up. I think if, as an industry, we, the robotics industry, get much better at leveraging XR to drive sales, we will differentiate ourselves in enterprise and commercial settings, but also it just fits what we're doing so much better than a SaaS company or, widgets or whatever services. Like, XR fits robotics really well. And so leveraging it in sales is something that, as an industry, we should really drive and do best practices. And starting with best practices, I would say if somebody's getting started in robotics and looking at mixed reality, I'd say get a budget headset. Meta's Quest 3. I'm going to go with Quest
Quest 2 or
3S.
the Quest
4.
3, depending on what you
Yeah.
want to do. Yeah.
Whichever is their several $100 latest model is a great place to start. Those are great headsets. You can play with them, understand them, develop for them, and you can also place them on other people's heads without needing to calibrate to their eyes more deeply. Like Magic Leap, Apple. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Like, you have to spend
HoloLens.
HoloLens, like calibrating to your eyes and depth perception and things like that. Meta's done a great job at using a generally great headset that you can just pop on somebody's head. And then the user experience that you should start off with, without exception, is just putting the 3D model in the room and then letting somebody walk around and look at it. And you can make it full scale, you can make it small, you can make it big, but very simple and very inexpensive. This is one of the most powerful user experiences that XR brings. So don't let your brain and your product mind go, oh, what if we have this interactivity? What if we have this menu option or this animation? Let go of that. This is a very simple narrative. Here it is in 3D. And that has worked really well for Tubular Network. It's easy to set up, and you can start to understand the value that it drives in the sales process. And I'll go one step deeper in terms of when you do develop an app to show this first experience. It's really there's two modes. One is setup and one is use. And so the setup is, where do you place that item or that scene, and rotating it, and scaling it or whatever, put it there. And then in terms of the user experience, this one, super powerful. You draw a circle when you set up the headset, and what's it called, like play space?
Boundary. Yeah.
Yeah, boundary. You set up a small circle. You don't make it the whole room you're in or a huge circle. You set up a small circle and you start the user experience outside of that circle. And if they put on the headset, they'll see the real world around them pass through cameras. It takes down the intimidation and scariness of blocking out the whole world that someone's going to run into you or you're going to run into something, because you still see the room. And then there's this little circle over there, and the person giving the demo can say, if you look over here, do you see the circle on the ground? That's the future. That's the experience. Go step into it. And they step into it, and all of a sudden their world goes from the world around them to just this focused, solitary experience on what you're trying to show them. They don't have to use a controller. There's nothing complex about the interaction. They just look around it and they comment on it. You have a discussion. It is such an incredibly powerful demo that's relatively straightforward and inexpensive to set up. And that's how everyone should start. Don't let it get more complicated than that. You can always build from there, but like, that's your target. Go deliver that. Go run it a lot of times and learn from it, and then figure out where you want to go from there. And ultimately, I think a whole sales experience in mixed reality, where you can send the one pager, you can send the video or the slide deck, you can have meetings, whatever. But the thing that closes everybody is when they get that headset on and they're like, oh, I've got to show my colleagues, my boss, whatever. I've got to show them this. And then that becomes the moment that wins people over in that customer organization. So, in conclusion, it is one of the most powerful sales tools out there. The robotics industry needs to adopt mixed reality and make that standard.
What I have found interesting doing this series, and what I hope others do as well, is that XR has use cases in a lot of industries. And the best way to kind of explore them is to talk to people who are in them. And it's unique how many different ways one startup has used XR throughout its operations. Makes me wonder what other stories are out there.
Like you said, most of the successful business cases, not use cases, but business cases of XR are secret. People aren't talking about them necessarily. So unless you ask the right questions, it seems. That's a really interesting takeaway from this episode.
Yeah, I was hoping that one would, I don't know, resonate with y'all and folks watching this, is because this is a game in which success doesn't necessarily mean broadcast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, other things that I forgot to mention, but one of the killer applications for mixed reality in robotics is simulation. So it's part of the sales process. But like once you convince people this is interesting, now the robots have to go interact in their environment. And you could do a general 3D animation or simulation of a environment like theirs, but sometimes it's needed or beneficial to mock up their exact environment, their processes, how it integrates with things, and through that digital twin simulate the impact it'll have on the KPIs they care about. And a good example of that is baggage handling. So we had the Grand Rapids Airport up in Michigan. They've got this flight program which gives out grants to innovate. And they said, would your technology work for baggage handling? And I said, yes, I've had a long time vision and dream of a better airport experience by just not carrying around bags. In fact, the best person to envision it was Dylan. He had this incredible vision where, like, if Tubular Network went all the way to your hotel, like you could just say, I'm leaving for the airport, and give them the bags, and your bags go separately from you all the way to the airplane, to the airport and then the airplane, and you just waltz your way there without all that baggage. Is beautiful. But if we just focus on the airport, that's what this simulation did. And our ability to do a digital twin of the Grand Rapids Airport and digitally insert Tubular Network to handle baggage handling and simulate how that impacts the traveler experience was incredible for a very low cost relative to prototyping this or building it anywhere where we could test baggage. We were able to show very promising results and have a very compelling digital twin and simulation, like a animation, basically a 3D vision of what this looks like. And it got people over that hump of disbelief almost immediately. A very large airline said, this is the first innovation in baggage handling since the industry's inception 70 years ago. Some of the largest airports in the United States said, this is really interesting, we want to pursue it. It got so serious that I realized I need a partner to get into that industry, as baggage handling is a very critical operation in airports, and I don't come from the aviation industry. But just having that mixed reality, or it's closer to like a digital twin that's 3D and a simulation on it that could very easily translate into a mixed reality experience, just having that made something possible that otherwise couldn't have. It wasn't a little bit better at helping the sales process. It was like it leapt over all the problems that I'd been running into. And that's part of my dream sales experience and process. And then once it's deployed, operationally, you can use that digital twin and mixed reality to have a better idea of what's going on in this complex process. Like manufacturing, airports, there's a lot of industries where there's just so many moving people and things and operations that are critical that it's hard to visualize all of them. And mixed reality is a killer application in facilities operations or otherwise just like logistics in a given campus or facility. This background, like I totally built that mixed reality. We found this design for a better tool pegboard in a hexagon, so that way it could go around these weird windows. It also looked a lot cooler than just a cheap wood. And I love the idea of making it, for one, my Zoom background during COVID, but for two, something customizable that I could use in different ways. So just hold my tools or my prototypes. And we ended up laying it out in mixed reality, where there's like a virtual me and a real hexagon and a virtual hexagon. And I lay it all out, and I then drew a third workbench that didn't exist yet. I hadn't bought it. And I drew that there, and I stepped back and looked at it, and I was like, this is so cool. I have to build it. And it was helpful in me deciding that I needed to put in more time into that design. It was something I could do. I didn't know if it'd be worth it. And it helped me validate that to a sufficient degree to go into it. And now I get comments on this background all the time in terms of, is that a fake background? And the answer is no.
Very cool. And the thing you mentioned about digital twins have seen a bit of a revival lately, and that's probably an episode on its own. But it is interesting to see, especially with the capabilities that that brings, the concept of the digital twin actually being able to be a product that can scale and not just an expensive consulting tool. And
Yeah.
the way you were talking about the digital twin for the airport, like that is a very practical, scalable tool that they can have. You're going to connect up all of the data sources, have it update in real time, and then give you those insights and analytics. And I think that's the dream. I haven't seen very many applications of that in the real world that actually worked. So it's really cool to hear about that. And I think that's something that anyone that works in engineering and design should maybe make a little mental note about to come back to later.
I would say that anybody who owns a facility or like a property, a physical space, and they have to maintain, operate it. This goes from like your house to an industrial warehouse to a place of business, all the way up to a city or a country. If you're the government in charge of some space, at some point, it will be inevitable that you own a digital twin of that, a 3D digital twin that all of the data generated from it can be expressed on for operational purposes. And I guess a airport's great. Like every airport should have a digital twin where it's showing where planes are going, where baggage is going, like the not only the conveyance system, but the carts pulling bags around, where pilots for planes are, where the crew, where travelers are, what the state of check-in lines are, what the state of security is, the security lines. Cybersecurity is a great use for digital twins and like spatially visualizing that. I think makes a lot of sense. I feel like we've almost regressed from the 90s. Like I think it was the movie Hacker where they visualized a data center as like this almost like downtown with the skyscrapers, and that's how you like hacked into it, was this 3D model. And I'm depressed that's not where we've arrived at yet, and that we've gone back to it's just a nice web app that we should use to manage cybersecurity. But yeah, digital twins are great for operations. They're also great for simulating. Like if you've got a new tool that you want to integrate into your facility, doesn't matter if it's like cameras or air conditioning, I don't know, some new automation, whatever, robotics, robots, is like that gives you a platform to test it on virtually before you do it in the real world. And like testing it virtually before doing it in the real world is such a valuable use of mixed reality. Like even before we went and bought all the tubes that went into the abandoned hangar that we were operating out of Austin, we did that digital twin. Like we scanned the whole hangar and then brought in the 3D, like the digital twin of what we would build to make sure it would work. And then we ordered the tubes, and these tubes arrive and they're like, I think 1,000 pounds each. They're 20 feet long. I sent a video of them rolling off of the truck, and everyone who sees that just goes, oh, that's a big tube somebody's got to deal with now. It's just like, before you make that heavy decision of buying something physical, test it out virtually first. And so for airports trying to integrate new technologies or baggage handling, whatever, you should have a digital twin and then test it there first. And I think that scales up for a lot of industries.
And if you are listening to that and you're like, oh, that's so much space, that's so much data, an airport's huge, a city is huge. We built a digital twin of our inner solar system, which is quite literally an astronomical amount of space. And we demonstrated that it is indeed possible. And it's a live digital twin, right? This is as live as you can get broadcasting data from close to the sun to Earth. And I think that's a really important call out, that if you're responsible for some physical space that conducts operations, whether that's business operations or like a municipality or a country, you are going to be responsible for a digital twin in the near future.
If you don't own it,
prepared.
if it's not your digital twin that other people can use, eventually you will. Because like it is a representation of what you own. You need to go build it and own it, or like have somebody build it for you and own it. What you don't want to do is have some service provider build it for you and then they lock it down and own it, and they don't want you to use it outside of their purposes. So like, so cool that you guys have built a solar system,
The
universe,
inner
known
solar
universe,
system.
solar
Yeah, it's the
system.
inner solar system and all the satellites in their position that capture solar imagery when it comes to tracking CMEs and things like that.
I want to see that if it's not like confidential or sensitive. And I
It's
really want
free
it to
on
be
the
in
Quest.
I want it to be in the B-roll right now. Like I want to see your digital twin of our solar system as it exists today, because that is so rad. Understanding orbital mechanics and solar system movement in 3D, absolutely incredible. I was very proud of NASA for investing pretty heavily and ahead of time into the 3D space for that. But
Yes.
like, so cool you guys have built that.
Thank you.
So rad.
Yeah,
It was fun to build.
it was, yeah, and it's really fun to put people in that experience for the first time. I'm
Mhm.
remembering we were at a conference and we had some people that had never been in XR before, and their first experience was looking at a live digital twin of the sun, Earth, inner solar system, and just how mind blown people are by it. And as Sophia said, it is free to try on the Quest store. So if you own a Quest device, it's Aura Space Weather Data Explorer. And
Space weather.
yeah, we pull straight from the NASA fleet, so you can see it. The sun's quite active right now. If you're watching this near when this episode airs, you can catch lots of solar flares popping off and lots of activity going on.
For people who don't have a Quest, one of my favorite AR use cases is an app that, and I'm going to have to link it because it's going to take me a minute to remember the name. But if you hold it up to the night sky, it will show you which are stars and which are planets. And it will draw over the constellations for you to make it easier to see. It's really, really cool. Now,
That's
it's
super
not
cool.
technically using like full augmented reality, but it's really fun. And I agree. I think the solar system in space is actually like a great gateway.
Yes, a great gateway for people to understand like the value XR could bring, but then also like link it to a real world. Like this is the sky you look at every night in a totally different view. Versus like a video game, it puts XR in this like corner, this box that's like, this is for fake experiences or like not lifelike experiences. And the one that y'all made is like, no, this is a better way to see what your life looks like, your real world. One of the things that I've done with mixed reality is we've made so many prototypes at Tubular Network, like over 300, that I've started to forget some of them. And so we made prototypes that were wildly dangerous, far too fast. I've got this video of us during COVID. It was like this roller coaster style that just went way too fast. We 3D printed these turnaround bars. Those exploded during one of the runs. We always made sure that we weren't at the business end of either of those, but along the side where it was safer. Anyways, we made so many prototypes that I started to forget what we made. So I actually made a VR museum of our prototypes. So I took some of select 3D models of things that where we had tried something or learned something, and just to document it for my own reasons of like, I want to remember things that we built, but also in the future, people are going to have ideas of like, have we tried this? Should we do this design? Should we have this approach? And to be able to go back in this infinite museum of prototyping, walk to that point and say, this is related to this idea. This is how it went. This is what we learned. Let's contextualize your idea with those lessons so that we don't have to relive all of them, or maybe what we thought was true here no longer is with this new idea. So we branch and go. A VR museum of every prototype you've made is like useful. It's not something that I've gone back to a lot yet, but I think there's, as some would say, like, I think there's gold in them thar hills.
In engineering, like lessons learned is a huge deal. It's something you have to
Yep.
do for every project. And it's something that when you're starting a new project, nobody wants to sit down and go review the lessons learned from the previous one. They're like, no, we got it. Let's just get going.
Yeah.
We have them. So if maybe there's, like you said, there's gold in them are hills. If someone can crack the use case for learned. And
there's just
an
so much
XR
more
experience.
context.
Yeah.
Like, first of all, it's less lame to look at all of your previous lessons in 3D where you can walk between them. It's not just like text or maybe some pictures on a screen. And you can have a richer conversation around those. and you can put in different media. I think it's really promising. Okay, I am such an XR nerd that I have emphatically shown everybody in my family and friends, put headsets on them and like filmed their experiences. Have y'all done similar things?
Yes, I very recently put my oldest into an XR experience for the first time. It was an app that we're releasing in a couple weeks, and now all she wants to do is put on mommy's special glasses so she could fly the plane.
So cool.
It's so fun.
I've made grandparents, I've made aunts and uncles, people who just got a mobile phone or don't use it that often. I put in here, and just to see their childlike wonder as they put these headsets on is incredible. So yeah, I love XR nerds for that, making their family try this technology. There was a moment that was really cool when I was working on Hyperloop, and I had a very accurate 3D model of the Hyperloop pod in front of me. We were in the tent outside at the SpaceX Hyperloop competition. And so there was the real pod right there, and there was this one. And it was partly to get people to come by and try it and ask questions about the design. Like, to take off physical parts of the Hyperloop or describe it was very challenging because it was a dense vehicle. But by having this floating AR CAD drawing, it was a really easy way to say, like, yes, this is this system and that system, and you can like pull the system out and keep talking.
Cool.
And then at that moment, this like Google executive who was in charge of quantum and AI back in 2019, so early days, came by, and he was trying to recruit builders for what he was doing, because what he was doing was even crazier than Hyperloop. And then I got to put this headset on him and dream a little bit about how to visualize quantum computing and AI in this kind of medium. XR has really been a technology in my life for the last 10 years that has expressed itself in many interesting ways. I have a ton of stories like that.
That's what makes this fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. We are out of time, but Ben, thank you for joining us today. And how can people connect with you, and where can they find Tubular?
Tubular.network. So instead of .com, the domain is network. So just tubular.network is where we're at. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. So anyways, that's
We can
how
also
you can
link
reach
it
out to me.
below.
Yeah.
Oh,
We will
yeah,
link it
we
all
should do
below. Yeah.
We'd like to thank you all for listening. If you want to be a guest on a future episode, or you want to recommend a guest, please let us know in the comments or send us a DM on LinkedIn. And until next time, stay dauntless out there.